Good morning and welcome to this Euractiv online event, which is kindly supported by PGE, the Polish electricity company. My name is Frédéric Simon, I'm the Energy and Environment Editor of Euractiv, and I will be your host for today's event, which is titled The New EU Emissions Trading System, What Should Change? I believe this is the first event that Euractiv is hosting since the summer break, so welcome back to all of you. Now, today's discussion on the ETS reform comes less than 2 months after the European Commission presented its new Fit for 55 package of energy and climate laws, whose centrepiece was a reform of the emissions trading scheme, the EU carbon market. So, what are the main objectives of this reform? Is the reform overall a fair and balanced proposal for all the EU countries and industries concerned? And what changes are needed, if any, in order to improve the Commission's proposal? Now, to discuss this topic today, I'm delighted to welcome Beatrice Aguilera, Director at the European Commission's Climate Directorate, where she's in charge of European and international carbon markets. Marian Marinescu, a Romanian MEP from the centre-right EPP group. Milan Elkoff, Research Fellow at the Centre for European Policy Studies in Brussels. Florian Rothenberg, Carbon Market Analyst at ICIS. Robert Jeske from Kobice, a research institute based in Krakow, Poland. And Pavel Siosz, Vice President for Corporate Affairs at PGE. Welcome to all of you and thanks for joining us today. We'll start this virtual conference with a series of short opening statements from the speakers, and then we'll move on to a Q&A discussion that will also include questions from the audience. To put a question, just use the chat function on Vimeo. So, but before we dive further into this topic, let me first give the floor to Pavel Siosz from PGE. Pavel, unfortunately, has to leave in a few minutes, so we agreed to start with him first. Pavel, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. PGE welcomes the publication of the Fit for 55 package, as we are committed to increase share of renewable energy in our portfolio to 50% by 2030 and provide 100% green energy by 2050. Due to our long-term commitments, we are pleased with the proposal to use all EU ETS national carbon revenues to finance the investments in line with the EU ETS directive. This means that more public funds will be dedicated to finance the energy transition. However, we must keep in mind that for certain countries, the investments need stemming from a 55% climate target largely exceed the national revenue from the EU ETS. Because of that, countries like Poland have structural deficit of allowances, which has been estimated by independent think tank at over 600 million of allowances less than expected emissions until 2030. That's approximately 40 billion of euros with current CO2 price that the Polish companies will have to spend abroad, which results in less funds to finance the energy transition with the Polish own resources. Speaking of the investment needs, we have estimated the investment costs to meet the 55% climate target at 136 billion of euros, and after taking into account all available funds, we have estimated the investment gap in Poland at 93 billion of euros. The National Center for Emissions Management carried out a study recently which showed clearly that the implementation of carbon neutrality target in the Poland would have a knock-on effect on the Polish economy and would translate into 100 billion of euros of lost consumption by Polish households. This brings me to my third and final point. We recognize the proposal to increase the modernization fund. However, it falls short of what the Commission could have proposed. The increase of the modernization fund seems, especially given the large extension of the potential coming from the new sectors subject to EU ETS, and the complete exclusion of natural gas as the transitional fuel from the scope of the modernization fund investments. This is why I would like to present shortly 3 proposals for possible solutions. First of all, Poland, as the country having less allowances than the needs, should be able to contribute to the market stability reserve proportionally less and use a part of volumes dedicated to the MSR to finance its own transition instead of Polish companies financing budgets of other member states. Secondly, we must mitigate extra energy transition cost through an appropriate increase of the modernization fund. We must keep the possibility to finance gas investments from the modernization fund if the EU wants to show that it has good recognition for different starting. And last but not least, if we already have increased LRF of 4.2%, why do we still need to strengthen the MSR to achieve the same objective? LRF alone is enough to drive down the emissions to the required reduction level. I leave these questions hanging as I have to run now to another urgent meeting, and I wish you all a very fruitful discussion.
Thanks, Pavel. I understand you have a few more minutes to answer a couple of questions. So
yes, of course.
Yes, so let me start with this one about the carbon prices on the ETS, because they've reached unprecedented levels over the past days, reaching past 60 euros per tonne. So how does that affect PGE as a company?
This is obviously a problem for a company like PGE that is today largely based on coal for now. Higher CO2 prices mean that we have to spend billions on compliance costs associated with surrendering the CO2 allowances instead of using these funds adequately to build our renewable and low carbon portfolio. Last year, we spent approximately 1.8 billion of euros, and the first quarter of this year over 400 million euros on EU ETS allowances. As we want to build 2.5 gigawatts offshore wind and over 3 gigawatts photovoltaic installations by 2030, the EU ETS is drawing our funds away from CapEx to cover our OpEx needs.
Thanks for that. There's also another thing happening currently on the markets is the high electricity prices. So doesn't that help compensate for the high carbon costs?
If Poland had enough CO2 allowances in its national allocation pool to cover the emissions from the Polish economy, the investment gap in the entire Polish economy would be significantly smaller. The government would then have enough resources coming from auctioning revenues to set up a special investment fund that would use the carbon revenues to finance the energy transition. we would then have less of a problem that these costs will have to be borne by the Polish economy and our households. This is why, without adequate revenues from the EU ETS auctioning, we are putting at risk a successful rebound of the Polish economy in the economic crisis caused by COVID.
Thanks, Pavel. Maybe a final question about the potential shortage of allowances. You expressed worries about that. When do you expect the shortage to start? What would be the consequence of that for the energy transition in Poland? And isn't that also an incentive in a way to accelerate the transition in Poland?
Could you repeat?
So you expressed worries about a potential shortage of allowances under the ETS. Can you tell us when you expect the shortage to start? Is it closer to 2030 or would it be sooner than that? And what would be the consequence of this for the energy transition in Poland?
I expect it should happen in this decade, in 5, maybe 6 years.
Okay, and isn't that also an incentive to accelerate the transition then? Oh, it seems we've lost the connection now with Pavel Siosz. Yes, so it seems we can't hear him anymore. In any case, thanks, Pavel, for the time you spent. I understand that you have to leave now. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks. So we can now go back to the introduction speeches, starting with Beatrice Aguilera. Beatrice, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Frederick, and good morning, everybody. A pleasure to be with you. Just a clarification on my name is so Jordi Aguirre or Jordi, you choose. But don't leave me alone with Aguirre. It's a little bit weird to hear. So a pleasure to be with you in these interesting times. As you said 2 months ago, when 1 month and a half ago, the Commission has presented a very ambitious package. But the very ambitious doesn't mean that we have changed the ambition compared to climate neutrality that has been agreed by Council and Parliament, and the 50 minus 55%. So the package, just my main messages as introduction is that one, we align with 55% and we align in a more mainstream way. So it's the different policies all contributing to decarbonizing the economy. The second important point is we make a better business case, as your last question, Frederick. We make a better business case for 75% of the economy with a new ETS in building and transport, a reinforced ETS in what we call stationary, so industry and power sector, aviation reinforced, and then extension to maritime that up to now didn't have any decarbonization strategy. So it's a second big message is this business case for 75% of the economy covered by carbon pricing. And the third point is the social aspect. We consider in the past the social aspect, but not as strong as we should have done. So now more comes, and not only member states' differences, as PG has mentioned, but also the citizen perspective. So we know, we are aware that carbon pricing in building and transport will need different measures, and vulnerable citizens need to adapt and to have tools in this transition. And we try to construct a positive agenda with Council and Parliament that's reinforcement. So carbon pricing can also give opportunities of refurbishment of your house, offer cleaner mobility and opportunities combined with these social aspects. So these are my main 3 points, and pleasure to be here. Now, as you know, Council and Parliament have started discussions of this fascinating path to the minus 55% ambition.
Thanks, Beatrice, and apologies for changing your name. Let me turn now to Marian Marinescu.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the invitation. My name is Marian Jean Marinescu. It's very simple, like in French. It's not so complicated. So thank you very much for the invitation. Of course, Fit for 55 is the main political topic for the next, in my opinion, at least 1 year. It's a package that it's economic, but also political in the same time, that will affect both economy and people, consumers, a lot in the future period. So now we have a package, good or bad. There are legislative proposals. That's it. We have to work on it, and we have to try to find the best result, the best proposal, the best laws that will be in the same, will be balanced and will fulfill the requirements, in the same time to fight against the climate change, but to preserve the competitivity of European economy and also the jobs. For the moment, the impact assessments that were presented, in my opinion, are not so complete. They are missing a lot of things. The main argument is that we have a law and we have to reach 55 reduction, so we have to do something. It is not very clear how we shall reduce emissions, except the alternative fuels and let's say electric cars, but here the proposal is not respecting the neutrality, technology neutrality. So there are a lot of things that are not perfect, in my opinion, in this package. But again, we have to work with this package, and I hope that we shall reach the best result, again, for the people and for the economy. Thank you.
Thanks, Marian-Jean. Let me turn now to Milan Elkoff.
Thank you very much, Fred. So first of all, I'd like to say that the starting point for this revision is actually not a bad one at all if you compare it to the previous revision of the ETS, which started in 2015. Then the system was in a much more critical shape, a lot of questions about its credibility, and you could pretty much say that in the past 2 years, this credibility and the effectiveness of the ETS and its price signal has been restored. So the basic design of the ETS and also of the market stability reserve is quite decent now, and you could even say that the most important change to reflect the new target with the linear reduction factor will already get you a long way. Nevertheless, there are a few challenges related both to the ambition level of the target and the fact that we will be extending the system to new sectors now that might lead to some controversy and also a few difficult decisions. The first is that emissions reductions in general and industrial decarbonization specifically really need to accelerate in just, well, the 8-9 years that are left up until 2030. And for industry, the free allocation that continues can undermine this if it is done inefficiently or if industry is shielded unduly So what is really desirable over the next 10 to 20 years is that in energy intensive industries, the climate neutral frontrunners would benefit from the system, not necessarily those operating more carbon intensive assets as incumbents. So for those more carbon intensive installations, it's very important that the ETS price signal works as a disincentive, just like it has done for coal-fired power generation, for example. Now with the proposed carbon border adjustment mechanism, free allocation would still continue up until the mid-2030s, even if at a reduced rate. But one of the questions we should ask ourselves is if this is the most bang for the buck, the most efficient way to really transfer an enormously valuable asset of these, well, hundreds of millions of allowances now worth more than 60 euros a piece. So there's also the alternative consideration that they might be used for the innovation fund to finance these carbon contracts for differences, which might lead to a much more direct impact on industrial emissions. The second topic I'd like to touch upon is the idea of extending the ETS, which I think is a very brave but good proposal by the European Commission, because you have the benefit then of more sectors being covered by a single cap. Also sectors that in recent times still have had increasing emissions. So it's very good to have a clear trajectory towards zero there. What is perhaps a bit problematic, though, is the fact that you have separate systems, and just adding an ETS price signal to a new sector like the fuels and road transport or heating might not necessarily do very much to the emissions in that sector. And some people will argue that that is a reason to, well, not do it at all, to not extend the ETS to those sectors. But I would say that it's very important to look at it from an economy-wide perspective. The fact that there are no reductions in one sector might still mean that you have additional demand for allowances elsewhere, and that the reductions then end up in the sectors where they are done most efficiently. That is the idea of emissions trading. But so long as you maintain the separate systems, you would not have that. So I understand the need for transitional arrangements and not disturbing the main ETS, but I do think it's very worthwhile considering how the two systems could be integrated sooner rather than later. And then, as Beatrice also referred to, there is the important dimension of the relative impacts on industry and the power sector versus regular citizens, which will now be affected more directly by the ETS. And here it's also important to consider the fact that for industry, there are a lot of different compensatory mechanisms, both directly and indirectly. They are the beneficiary of various subsidies. And this might not necessarily be the case for citizens. So there isn't a carbon leakage risk issue for these newly added sectors, but still the distributional dimension is very important. And I think this will become very important over the next 2 years. Thank you.
Thanks, Milan Elkoff, for this good overview and analysis. Let me turn now to Florian Rothenberg.
Hi. So looking a bit back 6 years ago, I mean, we had an oversupplied and also unambitious system. Like, who would pay a high price for carbon back then? But I think lessons were learned in the ETS in the last years. The oversupply will now be gradually reduced by the Market Stability Reserve. But we still see with the current legislation of the ETS, we see a mismatch between the cap of allowances and the baseline emission reduction that we get with coal phase outs across Europe, for example, and overlapping policies. With the Fit for 55 package that we have seen, we see that to change, and we see a clear commitment by the European Commission towards carbon pricing as a tool to drive decarbonization. And with the linear reduction factor and the rebasing of the cap, which is really important, we will reduce the amount of allowances coming to the system by 2 billion in the next 10 years. And this will lead to increasing prices. Coal to gas switching, it will simply not be enough, and there needs to be a boost in renewable energy investments as well as industrial abatement to meet this target value of around 800 million in the sectors. And to achieve that level of abatement, what we will need to see is a paradigm change in terms of market behavior by the participants, especially the industry. Their behavior has been really inactive so far, and they need to develop active decarbonization strategies right now, actually, because abatement takes time and it needs to be planned right now to come online on time. And speculation from both compliance players in some countries as well as the financial industry is an important element here, actually, to give this kind of intertemporal efficiency and increase the pressure on the industry right now already to develop these kind of strategies. The ETS, in the end, it ensures that we will reach the target. And I think the design of the other policies now is really crucial. How can we ensure that industry really develops these strategies and has a plan, and also power sector in some other countries? How much do we need to decarbonize? Because in the end, what will really lead to spiking carbon prices in the end is that if a situation in which we don't get the necessary abatement by a certain year, and then we don't have any fuel switch left, and then we will get spiking prices. So we need to drive this decarbonization as of now, basically, before the package is even agreed.
Thanks, Florian. And we'll close the round of opening statements now with Robert Jeske. Floor is yours.
Derek, one clarification. I'm from Warsaw, not from Krakow. And happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to discuss several issues that you already raised, and I think many of others will come up during the works on implementation of Fit for 55. So maybe I will concentrate on two things. One is the modernization fund and the role of gas as a transitional fuel. And the second thing I will raise is the increase and stability of the price development within the ETS, within the increased target and MSR changes. So one thing is that having in perspective from Polish side and the energy sector, the sector is responsible in Poland and will be responsible 80% of total emission reduction by 2030. So it is important to know that the whole burden for countries like Poland, which is coal-based, especially in the energy sector, will be in the energy sector up to 2030. And this means that this reduction potential will be utilized in the first transformation period, having in mind the 2050, 2030 in the middle. So the climate target in 2030 will achieve with relatively high marginal cost of emission abatement above 100, our calculations above 100 euros per ton. In the ETS. So achieving deep emission reduction in this energy sector will be associated with large capital cost, which combined with decrease in cost of operation will lead to significant increase in cost of electricity in district heating generation. So the renewable will increase, of course, and you've mentioned, and this is also idea that the fuel switch, but their development will be additionally stimulated by decreasing the capital cost. However, growing capacity, wind and photovoltaic installation will require a reserve of capacity. And this term thinks that the gas, natural gas, as a transitional fuel from the scope of the modernization, exclusion this from the modernization fund, which is not such a good idea in my perspective, especially having in mind that it's not dedicated to all the countries and their generation capacity, but for the countries which switching from the coal to let's say a second fuel, which is gas, which is half of emission reduction. So it's worth to think of two cases: one of the pricing and the cost for the households, and the second thing is the the reduction of the emission. So regarding the MSR and the development of the price, you Frederick mentioned the enormous increasing the prices, and we observed yesterday the new all-time high over 600 euros per ton. So, which is we think this development of the prices is increasing too fast and too high, and it can be very dangerous for the whole system as it is. So, and we think, and we analyze the regulation and the directive, and we say that there is no really safety valve to stabilize the euro prices, and the Commission doesn't have appropriate tools to solve this potential problem. And of course, MSR got the mechanism to release allowances to the market, but after 2023, when we reduce all what is in the reserve, and will be only 40 million allowances in the reserve, there is not much to intervene in a situation when it would be required. So extremely high prices of allowances can be perceived as a deliberate action by the Commission to accelerating the transformation and increasing only the prices in the energy sector and industrial sectors covered by ETS. But the question is whether such a fast transition with extremely high prices is possible, especially in EU countries like Poland, we got different starting points and different problems than the, let's say, rest of the Europe and Western Europe especially, and they would have less money available to invest in low carbon technology, because instead of what PG says, that they, not only they, but in general, the installation will have to spend a lot of money to buy EU allowances instead of investment in new technologies. And our forecast in the industrial sector, in all the energy sector investment in Poland, up to 2030, in the 55% reduction target overall and 61 target in ETS, we calculate this scenario as 45.6 billion euro in Poland up to 2030, just in new investment without any grid investments. So the revenue, if you compare to the revenue of allowances from the modernization fund, which is around the 10 billion euros, it's like 4 times higher investment needs for the energy sector, just only in investments, than the whole financial of the modernization fund delivers. So I think I will stop with that, and of course I'm happy to discuss that and other issues. Thanks.
Thanks, Robert. And you raised indeed the point about the rising carbon price, which has reached 60 euros on the carbon market, not 600. We'd be having riots in the streets if that was the case, potentially. So let's have a discussion about that then. The carbon price is rising now to levels which are really unprecedented. What are the immediate implications you think that this is having on the European economy? And let me start by asking the question to the researchers, and then we'll turn to the politicians. So, Milan Elkoff, maybe let's start with you.
Yes, thank you. Maybe I understand where the question is coming from, and this framing of a very rapid increase in the price. It's not that long ago, even last year, when there was a bit of panic in the markets, that was only around 17 euros. Nevertheless, the ETS has been around for a far longer time. Already since 2008, we've had continuous emissions trading periods, and at some point in 2008, the price was a little bit over 30 euros. Since that time, we also had quite a bit of inflation in some years, so 30 euros now is less than it was at that time. So in that sense, the carbon price did not even double in a 13-year period. That's another way to look at it. Of course, much shorter term, the rise has been much more significant. And insofar as it leads to higher electricity prices, which is the case now in some countries, that can lead to some problems. But we have the carbon price really there to provide a decarbonization signal, a disincentive for anything that's carbon intensive in the economy. If there are then negative impacts on consumers, taxpayers, whatnot, or even certain countries within the EU, then we need separate mechanisms to address that, not necessarily to change the functioning of the main system, which delivers that price, which is, well, right now market-based. So it might be necessary to think more about compensatory measures, but there's also an increasing amount of auction revenues for the member states to implement these themselves, and the EU state aid rules also allow for many different ways of compensation there.
Okay, thanks, Milan Elkoff, for this quick analysis. Let me turn to Florian Rothenberg. Your views about the impact of this quite sudden rise in carbon prices. What do you think are the implications for the European economy?
Yes, so I think there are three main factors to it, which is MSR, rising gas prices, and the long-term ambition. I think this is the most important element. And I think we especially have seen this price rise since there has been a clear commitment towards an increase of ambition and towards the ETS as a tool to drive decarbonization. And I think what impact that has at the moment is we see extremely high carbon prices, and we actually have this signal right now already that we have to invest in low carbon technologies. And in terms of impact, I agree with Milan. It's in the end, there are revenues from it. Like either industry receives it for free, so they have a direct incentive to sell their allowances and invest in decarbonization. And on the power side, you have a certain cost pass through, and basically the revenues from the ETS, they belong to the member states. And I think this is now the task, like, if there's, for example, an impact on the economy, like how can we, and on citizens as well, how can we use these revenues appropriately to drive this decarbonization? Because one thing is sure, we need, like with the climate law, we have to reach this target, and with the ETS it becomes certainty. And now the ETS is an efficient tool to drive that, but the revenues need to be put in the right place to really reach this long-term target. And I think this is the important element, and the transition will cost money, and it will be priced with the carbon price signal, sending the right investment signals right now. And with high power prices, I think we have that right now. We have LCOEs below the forward prices in the power market, and I think this is a clear signal to plan more projects and ease, and for the governments also to ease the deployment of additional renewables, for example.
Thank you, Florian. So I understand from what you and Milan have said that you're not specifically saying there should be amendments or tweaks made to the ETS, but surely this is a debate that is going to worry the politicians, and we'll turn to them in a minute. But maybe let me stay with you for a short follow-up question, Florian. During many years, there was a concern about the carbon price being too low, and there was a debate about introducing a carbon price floor. Now, is it now time to also consider maybe having a discussion about introducing a carbon price ceiling? And do you think there are good chances that this is eventually going to reach places like the European Parliament, for example?
I think if you discuss a carbon price ceiling, then you probably have to move away from that idea that you actually reach the target. And I think if you want to hinder an explosion in carbon prices, or not an explosion, but higher carbon prices, I think what you have to do is support your industry in their decarbonization pathway. I think a price ceiling, the only effect it can have is that you don't reach the target in the end anymore. So I think from a purely market perspective, I don't think that this would be an effective instrument.
Okay, thanks, Florian. Robert, Jeske, maybe a quick take from your side on the idea of potentially introducing a carbon price ceiling. Do you think that would be a good idea?
I mean, maybe I will just jump to this discussion because I've got different reflections in Florian and Milan. And I think this one side of the whole picture. So one thing is that, of course, this if we perceive ETS as a market-driven instrument, which the price is the lowest possible to reduce the 1 ton of CO2, that's completely fine. And you achieve the reduction target because you reduce at lowest possible cost the 1 ton of CO2 within the ETS as it is. But as long as we introduce the MSR, which is totally instrument that drive the price and increase the price and the speed of this let's say intervention within this system, then you've got not especially market instrument, but some kind of hybrid with the taxation. So I wouldn't agree that you don't deliver the target if you put the ceiling, because you've got also of course I'm not a fan of the ceiling and the Florian ceiling, and if you got the MSR, but if you put the Florian ceiling and you got the trajectory with the price to deliver the target, you still finish with the target. But of course, if you put the ceiling with the MSR, then this is totally messing around with the system within the system. So I think what is also important that it's not to speed up the increase of the prices, because we are doing that, and the Commission is trying to do that with the MSR changing a lot, to increase the price to speed up the transition with the technologies. But at the same time, you deliver the reduction higher than the agreed on the political level. So you have to answer your question. You have to be sure that you deliver the reduction at the lowest cost to deliver the target that you are politically agree on. Otherwise, you deliver the higher ambition target than you agree on, and for the higher prices. And this higher price and the higher cost are generating in the countries like Poland and Eastern countries that are more problematic within the GDP, the capacity to impose the reduction in the sectors that are already reduced in the Western countries. So it's many layers that you have to have in mind within the system, especially in MSR. And I think in MSR, if we increase the linear reduction factor by 2, I think that the increasing the threshold from 12% to 24 doesn't deliver anything more than increasing the prices at the moment, because it's stimulating the let's say sense that there would be lack of allowances in the future, so the price is increasing at the moment. So otherwise, from technical point of view, increasing the threshold from 12 to 24, at the same time having the linear reduction factor by double, doesn't change anything with the number of allowances on the market.
Thanks, Robert. So turning to the policymakers now, we're seeing, along with rising carbon prices, we're seeing rising electricity prices as well, which is becoming now also a source of worry in countries like Spain, a country you know well, Beatrice, Jordi. So some are also starting to warn about a potential gas crisis this summer, because the gas prices are also extremely high. So, Beatrice, Jordi, what is the role of carbon markets, do you believe, in this crisis that we're seeing unfolding now before our eyes? Is there anything that the European Commission can do in order to ease that pressure?
Well, let me calm a little bit the language of the crisis, if I can, and send a little bit a message of calm. So in our impact assessment, we have been working with prices between 50 and around 80 euros per ton. This has been the range until 2030. It's true that now we are in a context of high gas prices, and I leave the analyst to evaluate if it's geopolitical situation, Hurricane Ida, and Nord Stream situation. So there are different factors that I leave more to analysts on why we have these gas prices. I think that we don't expect that this is going to be a situation that it will be lasting a lot. So let's distinguish what is a short term and a medium term. So coming back to the prudency, we use this 50 to around 80 euros of carbon pricing. And when I started 4 years ago with a very low carbon market, I agree with Milan that the main criticism it was this carbon market is not working, prices are too low, and decarbonisation is not taking place. Well, we now have a solid carbon market, and I think that what has been an impressive decarbonisation in energy, just let's do not forget that before COVID crisis, because COVID years, of course, they are a little bit exceptional with for sad reasons, but before COVID crisis, the power sector reduced 15% their emissions, which is impressive. And the industry was more stable or shy reduction. So now is it the time with prices around 60 euros that industry will start decarbonisation? And we will need a faster reaction of renewable penetration. So just to not come to comment on our national situation, because I understand that there are countries that are suffering more the impacts of electricity prices, and due to different reasons. Spain, as you know, is nearly an electrical island, or Poland has coal from historical reasons and needs to accelerate this decarbonisation. Let me stay at European level. That it's a little bit more my role. So I would like to send a prudent message that it's a signal that MSR, of course, is doing its work. We have a market with an excess of around 2 billion allowances. The gas prices and electricity prices reaction, and then the long-term ambitions announced. We saw this in the first review. The announcement on the co-decision agreements foster these high prices, and we are sure that also the 55% and the package as making its work. We will need that to see that the carbon pricing has the good reaction from industry, from the investment of the revenues, the proper investment of the revenues, not only 50%, not only 40%, that all. And this is why we have proposed that 100% of the revenues go to climate investment. Also, the use of the resilience package. It's an impressive package that is on the table of member states, the majority of them, those who have adopted their plans. And there is, fortunately, a lot on climate change investment. So I think that, in short, I think we need to keep calm with the 60 euros. Market is working. Is a strong decarbonisation signal, and there is a round of investment mechanisms and other tools to cope and to drive the decarbonisation in the proper way.
Thanks, Beatrice. Let me turn now to Marian Marinescu with a similar question. What is the role, you think, of carbon markets in the high energy prices that we're seeing at the moment? And is there anything that you think European policymakers can do to ease the pressure? And you should unmute yourself if you've done so, Marian.
So I am not surprised, but as you see, you discussed a lot about market, carbon prices, how it's going up, what it will happen, and so on. I think that our scope, our main target is to decrease emissions, not to increase the prices of carbon. That is not, if it's not high price, is not a solid market. I don't think that you are saying that ETS is pushing the decarbonization. I don't think so. I think that the technology is pushing the decarbonization. So in the sectors that the technology went had the progress, now we can see that could happen something like in cars, for example, in automotive. But our main target is to decrease emission. Don't forget about this. Now we are speaking only about allowances, prices, and so on. I don't think that it's okay. If we look in the impact assessment presented by the Commission, that in my opinion is very weak, about the ETS impact assessment, ETS for maritime roads and buildings. So the cost of investment is not presented. The cost of the companies and the cost of the consumers is not existing. The presentation of the economic impact, environmental impact, social impact, jobs impact, 2 pages, and that's it. And everything is nice. It will be, everything will be fine. So I shall give you an example. In the automotive sector, in my opinion, electric cars will increase. That's very clear because the technology is existing, is developing, and is improving. A lot of companies, manufacturers announce that they will go to this. Doesn't matter 35 or not. Anyway, 35 target is not correct because it's tailpipe emissions, not life cycle emission. So this is not correct. Even legally, it's not correct. It's very clear. The alternative fuels also, there is a strategy which is not in contradiction with the 35 target for zero emissions, but there is a strategy for alternative fuels. So this will progress, will develop. Why we need to increase also the prices of the actual fuel to make the consumer's life more difficult, because the prices for the electric cars will not be affordable from the very beginning for everybody. So how the emissions will decrease because of ETS? Can somebody explain me this? The only way is limitation of mobility. That's it. There is no other way. The others will be alternative fuels and electric cars, but increasing the prices of the fuel will limit the mobility. That means that will make the life of citizens more difficult, and economic parties also will be more difficult. So why we need this? In maritime, we introduce the alternative fuels. In aviation, we introduce the alternative fuels. Not here, we should be more ambitious, and the Commission was not ambitious. We should have more blending, higher blending target. But in maritime, we introduce this, with thresholds for each increasing. So we introduce also ETS. What it will happen? We'll increase the price of the freight. That's
Thanks,
very clear.
Marianne. Yes, we get your point.
Just a moment, because I have to leave now. Yeah. So I finish this. All ETS, it's increasing the prices. That's very clear for consumers. Even if Mrs. Beatrice is smiling, but this is the reality. This will happen. It will increase the prices. But how? Please, not now. Send me a mail. Tell me how ETS will decrease the emissions. That's the most important. Don't tell me that will oblige the economy to make decarbonization. This will be done anyway because they have to survive. So how ETS will decrease emissions? This is my question. That even yesterday in the presentation of the in the transport committee, the representative of the Commission was not able to answer this question. And I am very sorry,
Thanks.
but I have to go because I have a meeting for Fit to 55. So I have to go now. So,
okay, thanks,
Mr.
Marian for joining us. Yes.
Anytime you may contact me and tell me your opinion. It's you may find my address on the site. So thank you very much. Thank you for invitation again. Bye.
Thanks, Marian. Enjoy the rest of the day. So let me turn to Beatrice Jordi for a quick reaction, because I think you asked the floor, Beatrice, so go ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Frederick. Well, it's a shame Marie-Jeanne has left, but I promised to write him an email. So just some 3 points. Innovation is crucial, but it will not be the main driver. The decarbonisation that we have achieved, which is since the 90s, we have reduced 24% of emissions, and GDP has grown 60%. So it has been a very good combination, and it was not from the sky. So it was mainly ETS directive and renewable directive. It was a clear regulatory push, and of course, a good framework for innovation. And just that, of course, we should not be obsessed with prices, and the main objective is decarbonisation. I think all around the table we are all sure about this point. And just to remind, before pre-COVID times, I mentioned before the power sector, but the ETS sector reduced emissions 8.9%. So it's working.
Okay, thanks, Beatrice. Let me turn now to and return maybe to the main subject of today's discussion, which is about the ETS reform and what, if anything, needs to be changed with the European Commission proposal. So, looking at the reform, any reform of the ETS, actually, will obviously inevitably raise questions about fairness, whether it's between EU countries or among the industries which are covered by the ETS. Poland has raised issues about a potential shortage of allowances, and overall, basically all these different parties are fighting now for a smaller cake, or a cake which is getting smaller and smaller, which is consistent, of course, with the EU's climate goals. So let me turn to the researchers about this question about fairness and balance in the overall proposal. Do you believe the Commission proposal is fair and balanced between all these different interests, whether the different industries or countries? And if something needs to be changed, in your view, what would it be? Milan Elkoff, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. I do think it's a difficult question to answer in one go, because the fairness question with regard to the between countries solidarity is a very different one than sort of the citizens versus industry perspective. I do understand what we've heard from some of the Polish speakers today, that there is a shortage of allowances in Poland, but it's almost using the type of system that we have in the non-ETS sectors, the effort sharing system, and apply that logic to the ETS, because there is supposed to be a single cap. There are then some calculations to determine how many allowances are auctioned by each country and who gets the revenue from that. But the idea that a country, a member state, is short of allowances is not one that we're supposed to be having in the ETS. That's more for effort sharing. I do think that the general point about solidarity between the member states and doing more with the modernization fund, transitional free allocation for the power sector, as has been done in the past, and also just a basic transfer of auction revenues to relatively lower income member states is a completely fair one. But it also seems like one that can only be answered at the highest political level. possibly even the European Council. But there are many levers to be pulled already in the legislation, and I'm sure a solution can be found for that. With regard to industry versus citizens, I do think it's important that whenever there is an asset transfer to industry, as is the case with free allocation, that there is a return on that investment, because it is really, well, the taxpayers paying for that. So it should be it should result in strong investment into climate neutral compatible technology. And I think if you do more with carbon contracts for differences, which are really linked to specific investment, that case is easier to be made than if you have generous amounts of free allocation to all incumbent industries.
Thank you, Milan Elkoff. Let me turn now with the same question to Florian Rothenberg. Generally speaking, your views about this question of balance and fairness between the countries and the industries at the same time. What is your view on that?
I think this is a highly political question. I am probably not the right person to answer that. What we see as analysts is that these instruments, like the Modernization Fund, Innovation Fund, they're always kind of the element that you use to make a deal, basically, when you discuss these packages. And I think that will be the role of these funds as well. What needs to be clear is the price of the carbon allowance. The money raised from it will be there. It won't be gone. And I think, as Milan said, it's really important that this is coming to the right place. And I think it will be an important element for the political discussion to bridge an agreement on the ETS. And I think in terms of fairness, I think the different member states, depending on their power and depending on their say, and also the different political groups, will basically bring up their arguments why they should receive more or less, and hopefully this can then bridge an agreement. And because I think the most important element here is policy needs to set the ambition of the system, and this needs to happen, and this should not be a bargaining element because we have to reach the 55% target.
Thanks, Florian. Let me turn now the question to Beatrice Aguilera. Can you maybe explain the reasoning behind the Commission proposal when it comes to addressing these issues of fairness, whether between countries or industries that will be impacted by the ETS reform? And what improvements or what room for improvement do you think there could be still now that we're reaching the political discussions in the European Parliament and in the Council?
Yeah, just thank you, Frederick, for the question, and also to Milan and Florian for the comments. I have to say that I'm particularly proud of all the social aspects and fairness of our proposal. I mean, we kept the 2% of the Modernization Fund, that is for poorer or lower income member states. We have a top-up of 2.5% Modernization Fund on the new ETS. And by the way, Poland is the biggest beneficiary of both 2% and 2.5%. The 10% solidarity of the revenue, sorry that I bomb you with numbers, but the 10% solidarity of the revenues is there also, is kept. And the new element is, apart from the top-up of the Modernization Fund, to transform the energy, to support the energy transition, is the social fund. The social fund concept adds a new dimension of solidarity. So it's not only between member states, but it's also inside member states. So it has a direct citizen perspective, because member states are number one on that role. But we thought that it will be good that from a climate decarbonization, let's do not forget that the money from the revenues comes from power sector or industries that they are unable to commit to this decarbonization and then pay, that this money, this payment goes to refurbish social housing or offer smart or cleaner mobility to citizens. It has a kind of European positive idea. Is it going to be enough? Is it going to be perfect? I would love to have the answer. I'm sure there will be discussions, but I can say that we have been working in having a creative approach and also a balanced approach. Also, this social fund that is more now with 60 euros, but it's a minimum 72, around 72 billions that we ask member states to also complete this and co-finance these funds. So we are talking about mobilization of nearly 150 billion euro. So this is how is this going to be used, how this is going to be implemented. This is the key question. But in all, I think that this multi-perspective of the 10%, the modernization fund for the transition of the economy, and also the citizen perspective offers a good picture of what climate policies could also offer to citizens. It is not only the danger or it's not only the threat that it is, but it's also an opportunity for investment and to improve quality of life, air quality, and smart mobility.
Thank you, Beatrice. Robert Jeske, you asked the floor so briefly because we're getting closer, unfortunately, now to the end of this event.
Okay, so maybe I would like to say something about this fairness, because I think it needs some explanation about this. Let's say the lack of fairness in the climate policy in general. So first of all, of course, I would agree with Beatrice. I observe, and I'm in the negotiation of climate energy packages very long. So I think that this package that the European Commission proposed is most complex and most reasonable from every works that have been conducted yet within the Commission. And I'm very glad that this level of reflection are also in these documents. However, I think that what's said that there is a gap with the allocation. And if you see the gap up to 2030, which is calculated around the 660 million, but this is not the only case. It's about the structural fairness that is since 2005 or since 2008. So if you do the simple calculation, how many allowances was delivered to the European countries, both free allocation and allocation from auctioning, with all the components with the key distribution within the ETS allocation on auction, then you see that there are countries that are the over allocated with allowances, and there are countries with deficit of allowances. So one of the biggest deficit since 2008 is for Germany and Poland, and Poland is around more than 400 million allowances. So if you see that before you could use cheap credits from CDM or JI projects, and there was also division on this limit for this usage from 2005 and 2012, then you see that there are some, at the level of installation, there are some installations that have in pocket a lot of allowances that could use up to now even. So I think it's worth to focus also on this structural deficit that and distribution of allowances from 2008 at least to see. And these funds that are, of course, the social climate fund is great proposal from the European side, and I think it's a natural need for these funds, the modernization fund, social climate fund, because the more the price is increasing, the more social and distribution aspects are coming into the table. So if you see the structural differences between allocation, then you see the fairness that should be also implemented in the proposal that we already have in place.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Before we close, I will ask each one of you to summarize what your main message is. But before we do that, let me just pick up one quick question from the audience. There were tons of remarks, and I'm really sorry we don't have time to go through all of them. But I picked up this question from Coralie Laurencin from IHS Markit. She's putting the question to Beatrice Jordi. What do you think will drive industrial decarbonisation? Will it be primarily the ETS or a combination of other tools? Beatrice.
I think that there's never one golden instrument, and a combination of instruments is the solution. Of course, what ETS will be is part of the board or steering committees of the industrial policies of every company and every sector. We know that the climate and the decarbonisation strategy starts to be a corporate part of the corporate strategy, which is highly welcome. So, and ETS clearly will help in this signal. What we have tried also in the package, and let me just come back to the free allocation, is you have noticed that we have put a conditional 1/4 of the free allocation, 1/4, which is not a minor part, is a link that the industry installs or implements, the energy reduction, the energy audit recommendations. So there will be, the answer is ETS will be crucial. I mean, your answer, it will be crucial for the business case. And but we will need other type of instruments like innovation and proper industrial framework for drive this decarbonization.
Thanks, Beatrice. I think we're reaching the end of this conference now. But before we close, let me ask each one of you to summarize very briefly, in 1 or 2 sentences maximum, the main message that you would like our audience to take home with them. And let me start with you, Robert Jeske.
Thank you. So maybe just overall perspective. I think that Beatrice made the crucial point. ETS, the main climate instrument of the European Union, and it will be, carbon pricing will be main tool for worldwide reduction. So, but the effectiveness of ETS depends on other instruments of climate policy, and that deploy in renewable energy, such as auctions and feed-in tariffs that cause the drop of allowances and consequently drop the EU prices. But similar effect can be induced by subsidiary technology that increase energy efficiency and reduce the demand for energy. So from other hand, the ETS system itself affects the effectiveness of these other instruments. For example, high prices of VUI improve the competitiveness of renewables, but reduce the role of revenue subsidies. But in countries with the high carbon-intensive power sectors like Poland, for instance, the high EU prices will sharply increase the price of electricity. And that could slow down the diffusion of, for instance, electromobility and increase energy poverty. So in this perspective, it's crucial for all the judgment that to see the effectiveness of the system that requires the integrated assessment, taking into account several potential synergies between these policies. So.
Thank you, Robert. Let me turn to Florian now. If you can be even shorter, that would be great.
Yes, the ETS proposal, in our opinion, is in line with the target set in the climate law, and the ETS will ensure that the target is reached. I think what's crucial now is that in order to avoid spiking carbon prices, the framework needs to be set on reinvesting on revenues, as well as helping and supporting industry and power sector in order to have visibility in the long term that investments are needed.
Thank you, Florian. Let me turn to Milan Elkoff now.
Thank you. I would just say that the ETS as a whole represents assets that are worth per year at the current carbon price 90 to almost 100 billion euros a year, and it's very important to use those assets wisely, both from an efficiency but also a fairness point of view.
Thank you. And now to conclude, Beatrice Aguilera.
Thanks, Frederick. So very short, carbon prices work. There is a key element of our 2030 package, and currently discussions on Parliament and Council on the coverage of the 75% of the economy and how this needs to be designed. Second, we need other regulatory measures to accompany carbon pricing. And third point, we need regulatory measures and proper investments. And the third point, we need to accompany this transition and enhance the opportunities on the social transition.
Thank you, Beatrice. I think this wraps up today's event. A big thanks to PGE for supporting it. Thanks, of course, as well to our panelists for your time and our viewers for following us. If you missed the beginning of this event, you can watch it again on YouTube. And if you would like to know more about upcoming events at Euractiv, please visit our website, events.euractiv.com for more. Until then, take care, stay safe, and see you next time.